Hello. Welcome. We'll start in a minute or two. Good afternoon. We'll start in a minute. Get your coffee, refreshment, relax and enjoy. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are around the world. Welcome to another round of monthly briefings on internet governance and digital policy by Diplo Foundation and the Geneva Internet Platform. It's my pleasure to introduce, as always, my colleague Marco, who will help with moderating the chat discussions. That's at the same time the encouragement for you to use the chat extensively for any sort of comments, questions, discussions, and Marco will help me feed all the inputs into our discussions. With me today also, Jovan Kurbalia, Stephanie Borpsaila, and Arvin Kamberi as the speakers. You'll see very soon what particular aspects there are, and a huge team behind the preparations of this webinar. For those of you that might be for the first time at this briefing, a quick reminder of the outline. So we start with the review of the main events of the previous month. We follow with the main developments of the month, what we call the barometer, trying to feel the pressure in different areas, distinguishing a couple of trends that stand out this month or a longer period of time. We'll move then into a quick engagement for you to vote for your top development of the month. We'll offer some suggestions to you. We'll be happy to hear your voice. We'll then look into what's coming when it comes to events in November, both on a global scale and particularly what the Geneva Internet Platform and Diplo Foundation are bringing to you. And at the end, last but not the least, very interesting part, as always, the review of regional developments. We'll hear from colleagues around the world what's happening in different regions. Let us start with the quick overview of the main events that took place in October. And we have discussed it in previous editions. We see it clearly this time that most of the events, or all the events, are basically happening online. There is not a single event out of the top ones that is taking place in situ or on site, if you wish, or offline. Some of the important developments or events in October: the meeting of the open-ended working group on cyber norms and international peace and stability in cyberspace had its second informal consultations. The AI Summit 2020 took place. ICANN 69, ICANN is already sort of used to conduct meetings online now. The World Summit on Artificial Intelligence, the UN World Data Forum, which took place online, the ITU Virtual Digital World 2020 as well. So we are seeing quite a visibility of AI-related topics, but we'll reflect on that today as well. Moving on to the main developments of the month, and as we call it, a barometer, we are running through a couple of areas or thematic areas, starting with, well, when it comes to global internet governance architecture, the pressure was rather low, except for the IGF Secretariat has published the schedule for IGF 2020. The registrations are done as of yesterday. I don't know whether it's going to be extended, but you can follow the IGF website for the next steps. Moving on to sustainable development, a couple of interesting developments. The ITU's Equals project and the US Department of State, through its Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs, launched a partnership to help close the gender digital divide by 2030. That initiative underlines the urgent need to ensure that women have equal opportunities in digital economy in all the regions of the world, and they will particularly involve private sector on board to help building opportunities and their entrepreneurship activities for women in the ICT industry. At the same time, the ITU and UNICEF called for multi-stakeholder efforts to help girls develop STEM skills, that is, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics skills. And the new report by the two organizations underlines the potential of STEM education to transform norms in the education system. The second important development is that the UN Economic Commission for Africa launched the Africa Data Leadership Initiative in collaboration with the Future State and Smart Africa. The initiative aims to serve as a space where policymakers, consumer rights advocates, and the private sector could work together to ensure that the data economy contributes to equitable growth and social progress across Africa. Moving on to security, the pressure in security area was rather high this month. So we sort of distinguished the three interesting updates. One is that France and 40 other states have proposed a program of action, or a POA, for advancing responsible state behavior in cyberspace. It basically aims to, in future, end the dual track discussions within the United Nations group of governmental experts and the open-ended by establishing a permanent UN forum to consider the use of ICT by states when it comes to security. It is just one among many proposals that are coming now as the mandate of the open-ended working group is finishing soon. China has proposed the global initiative on data security. The US and Russia are proposing or coming up with their draft resolutions as sort of a follow-up on this process as well. We'll cover that more in the newsletter and then in the next days as we see how it evolves. The second update is that Australia, Canada, India, Japan, New Zealand, the UK, and the US have issued a new call for embedding public safety into encryption in a way. Basically, the FireEye countries plus another two, which is an interesting signal. We have more partners on board in a way. Request the industry to, without reducing safety, in a way, without weakening encryption, embed public safety into encryption and enable law enforcement to access the evidences according to due process. But they also raise an argument that this would help companies themselves to be able to fulfill their terms of service in terms of combating illegal content and illegal conduct. Internet Society, Global Partners Digital, Center for Democracy and Technology, and some other partners have issued a letter where they raise the concerns that this will inevitably lead to weakening the encryption because there is no other way, in their words, to embed it, safety into encryption, or public safety, national security. And the last one is that the EU has imposed sanctions against two individuals, that is the two Russian citizens that are working for the military intelligence, Russian military intelligence. That's the way the EU, the European Council puts it, for cyber attacks against the German parliament in 2015, as basically using their cyber diplomacy toolbox of 2019. And at the same time, the US has issued, or the grand jury in Pittsburgh has issued an indictment charging 6 Russian hackers, again, from the group, from the military intelligence, for attacks, many attacks in the last years, including attacks against the Ukraine energy system in 2015-16, the French elections, the non-Petya, the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang, and some more. Again, more on security will be in the newsletter, and we'll certainly cover it in the next months. Moving to e-commerce and the internet economy, the US House Judiciary Committee of the House of Representatives has published quite a long 450 pages antitrust report, which argues that Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google each hold monopoly power, and in some cases should have parts of their businesses effectively broken up. In a way, they highlight that each platform serves as a gatekeeper over a key channel of distribution, and therefore they control access to market. Then each of them uses its position as a gatekeeper to maintain its market power, even surveil other businesses to identify potential rivals, and that they have abused their role as intermediaries to further entrench and expand their own dominance. The report also comes with a couple of recommendations, which include the proposals to promote fair competition in digital markets, to strengthen laws relating to mergers and monopolization, and restore vigorous oversight and enforcement of antitrust laws. And it is announced that the new antitrust legislation is planned to be passed within the next 3 to 6 months. At the same time, the US Department of Justice, together with 11 states, have filed an antitrust lawsuit against Google. Google is again accused of breaking the law in using its market power to shut out competitors, and among other, that it used billions of dollars collected from ads on its platform to pay mobile phone manufacturers, carriers, and browsers to maintain Google as their default search engine. And then there is a very interesting trend when it comes to digital currencies and a couple of interesting updates, and we have sort of identified that as a clear trend. So I'll pass the screen to my colleague Arvin to briefly lead us through what are the when it comes to digital currency in terms of the state moves. Arvin.
Thank you, Vlada, and hi to all. Really great to be with you. Of course, Vlada mentioned here several developments. In October, exactly, we witnessed several developments regarding this so-called central bank digital currencies, or the CBDC for short. That's now an acronym which is now adopted from IMF and other institutions. So basically, why is this now in focus this month? First of all, because of this update, which is here listed as last, but it is a crucial update regarding the central bank digital currencies. But let's first just go how central bank digital currencies are different from the current form of e-money, which is regulated around the world. Well, as we know, they explained this several times, e-money is actually the representation is a representation of a real tangible money issued by the government. So basically, in practice, that means that e-money we use now is just a digital representation of a different form of money. Well, anyhow, with this central bank digital currencies, primary emissions of states, or the amount of money one country issues as a legal tender, would be actually purely digital, and the data will for the first time actually represent the value, so no tangible papers or mental banknotes or no safes, etc. So the minting process would be digital, and the money itself would have a purely digital form, not other forms, tangible forms. Of course, this is in the future. We are still far from this idea, but as the first steps, countries recognize and will introduce a certain amounts of central banks digital currency that will be used in parallel with the existing forms of money. As we all know, there are basically 3 existing forms of money every central bank is issuing and controlling. Of course, first is international settlement money, which is often used between banks. And the second, of course, is the private money, which is on private banks accounts and other. And of course, the third one is a cash, which is a kind of a peer-to-peer form of money. But let's get deeper into developments mentioned by Vlada. So during the previous year, from I think October 2019 till October 2020, the Bank for International Settlements, which is a central international organization for financial regulation around the world, which is regulating payment system and payment systems, cross-border payment systems, cross-country payment system, etc. Actually, the Bank of International Settlement worked alongside with the Board of Governors of the US Federal Reserve, European Central Bank, central banks of United Kingdom, Sweden, Japan, and Switzerland, in order to actually set the standard regarding this particular form of digital currency, mentioned central bank digital currency. As a culmination of this work, this update that the BIS actually issued a report called Central Bank Digital Currencies, Foundation, Principles, and Core Features. I'm reading the title now. So basically in this report, Bank of International Settlement and other central banks kind of set the standards, or let's say, kind of highlighted the basic priorities of future central bank digital currencies. Of course, different countries have a different approach to financial policies. So this report from the Bank of International Settlement actually it's not considering central bank financial kind of regulations, but actually set the basic principles on which any future central bank digital currency should be developed. And those the report recognized three basic principles, which are actually we will see later kind of interpolate in other updates from this month. Basically, the report says that the first principle for creating CBDC would be this do no harm principle, meaning that actual central bank digital currency should not hamper central banks delivering their mandates. And the mandates of the central banks are, of course, monetary and financial stability. So in this sense, CBS is Bank of International Settlement, and the working group is saying that the future central bank digital currencies should not undermine current central banks. So basically, they are proposing some kind of a blend, or let's say they're proposing that the current central banks are issuing this currencies. Second pillar on which mentioned in the report and highlighted in the report is to actually create a diverse ecosystem in which central bank digital currency would coexist with other money and banknotes, etc. This is a principle of coexistence, and I mentioned this at the beginning, saying that it would not be possible to immediately go to fully digital form of money. So this is an important step highlighted in the report, that there is a need for a coexisting period in which both, let's say, cash and this new form of digital cash will coexist. And at the end, this working group from central banks and Bank of International Settlement actually put a third pillar to governments and other central banks to encourage innovations and efficiency, and particularly in financial systems at large. For this, of course, central banks need private sector to be actively involved, and this is a building block for something different, which we will mention a bit later. Well, with this report, officially, the Bank of International Settlement and central banks moved from the position of thinking about the creation of central bank digital currency to realm of actually building a blueprint on how to do it. So it can be seen as a clear starting mark or a shift of paradigm or change in paradigm, which actually emphasized that right now central banks are ready and should start creating this new version of digital currencies. It's a major shift. Doesn't maybe sound too much, but in this international organizations kind of area and language, this shift from let's do it, from let's think about how to do it to actually this is how you do it is a major shift. And as many think, it's approved by those central banks and on a political decision on a higher level. Just a few things from the report. Of course, second track of the report is highlighting technological building blocks. So not so often mentioned decentralization, blockchain, and such stuff, but basically kind of emphasize, how governments can solve this issue of central banks. In particular, I would like to mention that this working group of Bank International Settlement actually recognized the privacy of private data as a big issue to tackle for the future regulation around central bank digital currencies. As we know, in CBDS systems, of course, there is no payment data will exist. So there is no anonymity in this kind of system, in those systems. And of course, anti-money laundering and other procedures will be imposed from the central banks.
Thanks, Arun. One interesting comment from who was it? Let me see. Well, Nadia mentioned that PayPal started accepting cryptocurrency, which is sort of an interesting signal. But Glenn mentioned that Canada has created digital currency senior staff person with a Canada Mint, so that goes in line with what you mentioned. That we'll definitely see this trend. We'll certainly follow more on that, and again, we'll have more coverage on that in the monthly newsletter. And it seems like we'll be getting back to this and to you, Arvin, in the next months as well to continue. Yeah.
Can I just add as a finished thought that this development from the Bank of International Settlement actually was a culmination of a work of a G20 group and their financial bodies, which is called Financial Stability Board, which has set a roadmap for the better cross-border payments to be on at the verge of 2021. So they will bring a set of regulation among which they will regulate stable coins and the central bank digital currencies. So basically, this is an overarching report from the efforts from both G7, G20 group. And of course, all of these countries mentioned by our audience, Canada and others, Sweden, etc., they also started implementing a few programs, testing it, and this report from the Bank of International Settlement will be a blueprint for the future.
Thanks. Definitely a very useful document. We'll follow on that more closely also on the Digital Watch. Okay, moving on to the next round, the next sort of thematic area, which is digital rights. One interesting update is that in its report, the Freedom of the Net, the Freedom House notes that the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated a dramatic decline in global internet freedom. One of the reasons behind this trend is, according to them, that some authorities have used the pandemic to limit access to information and to expand surveillance powers, and the deployment of new technologies that were before seen as maybe too intrusive now came into force. There is another set of updates related to to content policy. Facebook introduced some policies to remove posts. Twitter announced changes to its policies. But I would leave, because that's a separate trend in itself, I would leave the screen now to Stephanie to take us through the content policy discussions, which I intensified, particularly in light of the upcoming elections and other things. Stephanie.
Thank you, Vlada, for the floor. Hello, everyone. Yes, as Vlada, as you said, content policy developments did intensify. So it's not just the discussions, but actually action and more debate around the legislation related to content policy. In reality, there were two main trends related to the big tech, as we saw also in the section on the barometer, related to the e-commerce, to the digital economy. So the first trend related to the big tech was content policy, which I'll be focusing on now. And the second trend was on competition and antitrust, and the report that came out, and the new lawsuits coming up also, etc. But we'll be focusing on the, I'll focus on the content policy now, and we'll go into detail when it comes to competition and antitrust in our monthly newsletter. So that's a sneak preview of what is coming up in the newsletter also. So back to content policy, I'll start by covering what has happened, and then I'll move on to what it means, what are the policy implications. So as Vlad has just said, we have seen a lot of action by the tech companies, but also by government, by certain government, let's say, bodies related especially to misinformation or disinformation. And this is especially because the US presidential election is around the corner. So that's, let's say, one of the first developments. And the second is related also to the COVID-19 pandemic and to the spread of misinformation related to vaccines, etc. And I'll open a bracket. That is why I have this background on fake news behind me. So I've chosen a background that really fits the developments that are going on. Related to the US presidential election. So again, as Vlada said, Twitter, Facebook has said that it will ban political ads 1 week before the US elections. Twitter also announced that it will change its policy to tackle the misinformation related to elections. Plus there were also updates from Mozilla, plus internet users, again, to regulate the content related to the elections. There was also an interesting development by Twitter and Facebook related to a New York Post article. I'm sure you saw, maybe not the article itself, because Twitter and Facebook did limit access, but maybe the discussion around it. In reality, Twitter did, a few days later, it did step back and now is no longer limiting access. But this created a whole new call for the so-called Section 230 to be amended, to be revised. Related again to the elections, even the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency of the US, it established a rumor control website, again for tackling content. Related to COVID-19, the UN launched the Pledge to Pause campaign, again, misinformation. And in other steps, unrelated to the election and to COVID-19, Facebook again introduced policies to remove posts related to the Holocaust. TikTok also announced new policies against hate speech. So all of this is in addition to all the policies that these tech companies have with regards to managing, with regards to governing the content, especially what is deemed as harmful or unwanted content. So that's the action mainly by the social media companies. But there is also the broader debate on legislation. Both in the US, let's say the main developments are in the US and in the EU. In the US, it relates to the Section 230, and in the EU, it relates to certain aspects of the Digital Service Acts package, which the European Commission will release very soon. So in the US, after the Post, the New York Post article, Twitter and Facebook limited access to it. There was a frenzy, especially on Twitter. Lots of people took to Twitter to say, the Section 230 needs to be revised, and the companies need to be liable both for willfully spreading certain content or for what they believe is censoring. Both the CEOs of Twitter and Facebook will have to testify very soon. And the thing is that in Congress, both sides are willing to quiz the companies for different reasons. But I won't go into the politics. I mean, it's all politics, but I won't go into the politics related to why both sides are willing to quiz the both CEOs. Another development related to legislation comes from the Federal Communications Commission because the chairman announced plans to interpret Section 230. And we do know a little bit what that means because we saw it a few years ago when it came to the net neutrality law. At the time, the FCC did repeal the internet order, which protected to a larger extent net neutrality. So if that development related to net neutrality is anything to go by, we can expect that the Section 230 will indeed be interpreted in a more limited way. In the US, in the EU, the development is a little bit different because the package related to the DSA hasn't been released yet. But we have seen that the European Parliament, certain committees, they have prepared their own reports, and a couple of weeks ago, they voted, they backed these reports, which are now going to the Commission and taken into account, and the Commission will announce the package, will reveal the package in a few weeks' time. What does all of this mean? This means that when it comes to content policy, when it comes especially to misinformation, disinformation, and harmful content in general, there are still plenty of issues, most of which are unresolved. And if I can summarize two of the major issues related to content policy in this scenario of let's say, harmful or unwanted content, or sometimes illegal content, is the following. The first is there is still a lack of agreement over what constitutes harmful content, because we do have to make the distinction between content that is illegal and content that is harmful and not illegal. And this is in fact one of the arguments that the tech companies have made when it comes to the Digital Services Act. The thing is this: the governments expect that the companies tackle all harmful content, whether they're right or not. That's open to debate. At the same time, the companies are saying, if you want us to regulate the content and tackle the harmful content, give us the legal basis, give us clear laws, clear rules on how to manage all this unwanted content. So when I say unwanted, I'm putting in the same basket both the illegal and the content which is harmful, but as such not illegal. Thanks. And the second problem, and this is especially linked to the situation in the US, is in which cases should companies be held accountable for their actions or inactions? Because Section 230, the debate on Section 230 tackles both. So governments do want the companies to be held liable when they willfully, when they knowingly and now allow the distribution of certain content, or the opposite, censor it, but without the legal basis, like what they believe that Twitter and Facebook did with the New York Post article and with a few other, let's say, incidents or developments in the past few months. Companies, and this is, we know this from the testimonies from the blog posts that the CEOs say, and also from the feedback that they have given the European Parliament, for instance, or the EU bodies related to the Digital Services Act. Companies do want to be held responsible, right, proportionally responsible, but they also want to be free to implement their own systems to safeguard themselves, of course, and the users.
Thanks.
How will this be solved? Well, we have to see. We have to see what comes up in the next few days regarding the Section 230, and especially the move by the FCC. Obviously, the US elections, or the outcome of the election, will affect also what will happen, because well, I mean, these are quite established facts now, but we know that with the current administration, most likely Section 230, it will be interpreted in a more limited way. If there is a change in administration, then we'll have to wait and see what happens. Because as
I will
said,
follow on that
sides.
definitely in the Digital Watch and the newsletter. And by the way, thanks, Richard, for sharing the link to your view on platform liability. We'll certainly follow on that. It will be, as Steph, as you mentioned, in the light of elections, it will become even more interesting and important to follow on that. Thanks,
exactly. So, Vlad, just that, and in the EU, the next step is the European Commission publication of the Digital Services Act on the 2nd of December. That's
perfect. We'll definitely follow on both of those. Okay, moving on to, and now Pat is also sending the FCC position on their authority to interpret Section 230. Moving on to jurisdiction and legal issues. Couple of interesting developments. The US Department of Justice filed an appeal against the court injunction from September, which is putting the TikTok ban in the US on hold. The appeal cites national security threats to the US through misuse of user data, and the appeal, as well as the merit of this case, will be discussed at a hearing on 4th of November. The Court of Justice of the European Union, has ruled that national legislation of the EU member states may not require a provider of electronic communication services to collect bulk data, i.e. to carry out a general and indiscriminate transmission or retention of traffic data or location data for the purpose of combating crime in general or safeguarding national security. Moving to infrastructure, two interesting updates. One is that the US Department of Justice has seized 92 domain names that were unlawfully used by and I'm quoting, unlawfully used by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to engage in a global disinformation campaign, end of quote. And they were found to violate federal laws, according to US Department of Justice. The second update is that Sweden decided to ban Huawei and ZTE from the future of 5G networks. Basically, as they're coming to 5G network developments in Sweden and lead up to the spectrum auction in November, Sweden banned Huawei and ZTE from contributing to building this 5G network. China has highlighted the lack of any absolute evidence that a threat to Sweden's national security exists, and Huawei noted that its exclusion is based on inaccurate presumptions and that it is not acceptable. Finally, a quick look at the new technologies, and there we have a very interesting update from the US, which is a national security strategy for critical and emerging technologies, and a couple of other interesting updates. And I pass the screen to Jovan to brief us on these strategic trends. Jovan.
Thanks, Vlada. Hi, everybody. It is really follow up to the previous developments. President Trump announced the US National Strategy for Critical and Emerging Technologies. There are few elements which are critical. One is that he outlined what these technologies are, and it's very useful taxonomy, including advanced computing, AI, autonomous systems, biotechnologies, distributed ledger technologies. Therefore, there is more and more certainty around issues, what are these critical and advanced technologies? He also outlined the main steps to promote those advanced technologies, including norms and cooperation on the legislative international legal norms, which is an interesting new development in accordance with protection of the US national values and economic and security interests. The second development coming from the United States is establishment of the Center for Cybersecurity Standards. In the strategy, there are references to the relevance of standards, but strategy is a general document. NSA, National Security Agency, established Center for Cybersecurity Standards with very clear mandate to follow up on different standardization processes. And it has a bit of resonate with what is going on here in Geneva at the ITU and new internet protocol standards, which have been raising a lot of controversies. Those are two news from the United States. In general, there is increasing discussion on the digital sovereignty around advanced technology. In EU State of the Union address, China, other countries. In Europe, we have also can see acceleration towards regulation. Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly call for legally binding instruments to govern AI. This is that more human rights ethics-based approach in the Council of Europe. European Parliament is following, in my view, more interesting by developing on EU's governance approach to AI by starting from existing rules. Therefore, they have 3 resolutions on AI and ethical aspects, civil liability regime, and intellectual property. Therefore, that strategy which EU announced in February this year is gaining momentum. And then you have also presidency of the Council of Europe issuing set of conclusions on fundamental rights in the context of AI. In brief, United States announcing new strategy for advanced technology, establishing a Center for Cybersecurity Standards. In Europe, acceleration towards AI governance and AI regulation. Council of Europe focusing more on ethics and human rights. European Parliament and European Commission focusing on its approach to start with the existing rules on intellectual property, data governance, and then see what are the missing building blocks in governance regime that will need to be introduced in order to have complete AI governance picture. Over to you, Vlado.
Thanks, Jovan. Many interesting question open there, but we can certainly get back to that. Okay, moving on to a question to all of you. This is something we introduced last time. We'll see how it goes. To ask you, what is the top digital trend in October for you? And we have sort of distinguished these 9 trends plus the 10th one, which is other. So I'll ask you to vote, and I'll just quickly review what the proposals are. The first one is that the French proposal on the program of action as a follow-up to UNGG and UN Open-Ended Working Group on Cyber Norms. The second one is the 5I plus call on, not the FireEye, but the 5I call on ways around encryption. The third one is the US antitrust lawsuit against Google. The fourth one is European Central Bank report on digital euro. The fifth one is dramatic decline in the global internet freedoms according to the Freedom of the Net report. The sixth one is the call that emerged for the US to revise Section 230. The seventh is the Swedish ban on Huawei and ZTE from 5G. The eighth one is US strategy for critical and emerging technologies that Jovan just mentioned. And the ninth one is the Council of Europe call for legally binding instrument on AI. Of course, any other suggestions that you might have, you can place in the chat. And I noticed there were quite some reflection discussions in the chat. So while you're voting, I'm asking or passing the mic to my colleague Marco to summarize the comments and questions in chat. Marco.
Thank you, Vlada. I'll summarize three main threads of discussion that have emerged in the chat. The first one is regarding the October UNCTAD event, the Conference on Competition and Consumer Protection, which took place from the 19th to the 23rd of October here in Geneva, which discussed also issues relevant to e-commerce. Marilia has pointed out that this event was quite important because it was set to set the objectives for the next upcoming 5 years. And Richard has also pointed out, asking provocatively, on OECD and taxation, it was pointed out that the UNCTAD and event was working on taxation and had already agreed on guidelines and regarding the work of the UN group. So he's asking, why should we wait for OECD to intervene in the same field, which does not represent all countries? And Stephanie was also pointed out to what extent on the adoption mechanism, the UN group has already adopted these measures or has just discussed them. Is a vote coming or not? And the question was left hanging for people to answer in the upcoming meetings. The second point was the discussion on the Federal Commission on Communications and its position on the authority to interpret Section 230 that was mentioned by Stephanie. And Stephanie has recognized, as pointed out by one of the participants, that FCC General Counsel did say that FCC has authority, but the decisions among the members were quite split. From a quick survey from the members' interaction on Twitter, we can say that one member was in favor, one was silent, and two against. So they all concluded that the upcoming election of one of the members could solve the issue. And the third thread of discussion is regarding Arvin's intervention. Richard is asking, would the CBDC be used only for exchanges between central banks, for exchanges between banks and banks, or also for exchanges between consumers and businesses? And Arvin has pointed out that it's a tricky point, and he had asked for the floor whether he can elaborate further. 1 minute on this.
Sure, Arvin, if you wish, but really 1 minute.
Let me mute. Yes, I mentioned, try to answer this in the chat. Basically, as a three forms of money, this first one between banks and international settlement tested, working great. There is no trouble there because it's involved the international organizations which are mandating this. So, for example, JP Morgan's stablecoin will be used for many banks. So this tech is there, tested, stress tested, that's it. So basically, when they talk about digital currency, banks are saying they will issue it as a complementary to the cash, hard cash, digital cash. So it will, in a certain level, in a final stage, be for all three types of money or forms of money controlled by central banks. But in the first pilot project, it's going to be about cash. And prior to solving those regulatory issues around other forms of money, I don't think that they will start from there. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Arvin, for clarification. And thanks, Marco, for a good overview. As always, a very lively chat. We would need 2 hours to reflect on everything. I see the discussions on the taxation continue, which is great. When it comes to the poll, thanks all for voting. So definitely the winner is the US authorities filed an antitrust lawsuit against Google. And then it is followed by the French proposal on program of action, on cyber norms, and freedom of the net report on dramatic decline in global internet freedom. Interestingly, the 5G aspects, the US national strategy, and the discussions about encryption didn't get any vote. Thanks for voting, and let's move on to what's coming in the next month, in November. November will again be very hot when it comes to developments and events. So looking ahead into November, certainly the Internet Governance Forum, probably the biggest event of the month, happening online for the first time. Many sessions, some of those announcements were also shared in the chat. So make sure that you run through the agenda and follow. The Paris Peace Forum happening again online, the OECD Global Blockchain Policy Forum, the annual first conference moving online, the third round of the Open-Ended Working Group informal virtual meeting, G20 Leaders Summit happening online as well, the GFC Global Forum on Cyber Expertise annual 5th meeting online, and the African IGF also online. If there is any of the important events that we have missed, let us know, and then we'll certainly add to the list of events at the Digital Watch Observatory. Moving on to what you will get from GIP and Diplo in November or in the next days. There'll be a web chat right on human rights and the precarious condition of electoral democracy. Then the Digital Watch monthly newsletter. It's worth saying that we have launched also the weekly newsletters. So you can review the weekly newsletters on the Digital Watch and certainly subscribe to get the weekly snippets of what's happening. We'll report from the IGF 2020 as we do each year. The most we can cover with 200 something sessions. There is an interesting web debate on IGF Plus and what comes next on 3rd of November. So make sure that you don't miss it. And then certainly, again, weekly digests, AI policy conference up until the monthly IG briefing on 24th of November. And now let's move to the regional developments. There are a couple of very interesting updates around the world again. Here I pass the floor to my colleague Adriana, who will lead us with a short trip around the world. Adriana.
Thank you for the floor, Vlada. Unfortunately, we are running a bit late, so let's just dive right into it. And first, we go to the tropics, specifically the Caribbean region, where Andre Edwards is based. Andre will inform us about Guyana liberalizing its telecom sector and Montserrat connecting to the subsea fiber cable system. Over to Andre.
Andre Edwards with Caribbean updates. Guyana liberalizes telecom sector. The government of Guyana has issued commencement orders for the Telecommunications Act 2016 and the Public Utilities Commission Act 2016, ending the 30-year monopoly of GTT. The Prime Minister expects Guyanese citizens to immediately feel a positive impact due to the availability of greater choice and improvement both in the service quality and lower prices. The legislation establishes a harmonized framework for the telecommunications sector and greater transparency in the issuance of licenses and use of spectrum. Telecommunications liberalization is crucial to Guyana's developmental plan, and the government is committed to working with stakeholders to ensure all citizens have affordable access to various services. Montserrat connects to the subsea fiber cable system. Connectivity has been re-established with the subsea fiber cable system for Montserrat through collaboration between the Montserrat government and Southern Caribbean Fiber. The Montserrat subsea fiber optic project was funded by the UK Capital Investment Programme for Resilient Economic Growth. Through this program, fiber optic cables connecting Montserrat to Antigua and Guadeloupe have been successfully installed. Montserrat's fiber optic connectivity was cut over 20 years ago following the Soufrière Hills volcanic eruption, and all telephony and data communications have been facilitated through a microwave network to Antigua. Due to the re-establishment of connectivity, the government intends to offer more e-government services and pursue distance learning and telemedicine innovations for the benefit of citizens. The agreement between the government and SCF will see SCF maintaining and operating the fiber link and providing 10 years of high-speed broadband internet access for the delivery of government services at no extra cost.
some interesting news about telecommunications infrastructure from the Caribbean. Thank you for sharing, Andre. Let's head to Africa now, where we have Jacob Adame Biden. Jacob will tell us about internet disruption in Guinea and the launch of medicine delivery by Uber Eats in South Africa. Jacob, over to you.
Hello everyone, this is Jacob Adame Biden and I bring you the Africa Regional Update for October 2020. We start off from Guinea, where according to a report by NetBlocks, the Internet Monitoring Organization, Guinea is experiencing disruption to its internet ahead of the announcement of the results of the presidential elections that took place in the country this week. Live network data confirmed that as of 7:30 a.m. UTC, Friday, 23rd October, connectivity levels on leading operator Orange was just at 9%. According to the report, there are indications of similar disruptions on other networks, showing the severity of the outage to be on a national scale. The report further suggests that if the outage persists, it is likely to significantly limit access and flow of information both domestically and internationally, thereby leading to a lack of transparency in the democratic process in the country. We then move to South Africa, where, according to news reports, Uber Eats has launched an over-the-counter drugs delivery services in the country. The company is running this in partnership with local health group Medicare, which is a network of more than 50 clinics and pharmacies in the country. The partnership will allow Uber Eats app users to seamlessly buy OTC medications from trusted sources and have them delivered to them. According to Shane Austin, General Manager of Uber Eats South Africa, the nationwide lockdown and mobility restrictions due to the coronavirus pandemic created an immediate need to use its platforms to meet consumers' needs for essential items such as medications. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Jacob. Our next stop is the Middle East and North Africa region, where Noha Fatih is based. Noha will inform us about internet disruptions in Iran and Turkey's new social media law. Noha, please go ahead.
This is Noha Fatih. I cover internet governance developments in the Middle East and North Africa region. First update on October is regarding a report published by human rights organization Article 19 on Iran's November 2019 internet shutdown and its aftermath. The report unveiled how Iran's government cut off internet access for 6 days among nationwide protests back in November 2019, which in turn curbed access to information during a brutal crackdown that saw hundreds killed and thousands arrested. Among the key findings of the report is the persistent lack of clarity over who ordered the internet. The Internet Observatory NetBlocks also reported that internet was disrupted in Iran on the 8th of October this year as thousands gathered in the streets of Tehran to mourn singer Shahriyan. The lead singer was proscribed from performing in Iran after voicing out his support of Iran's 2009 anti-government protests. Another update is regarding a new social media law that was endorsed in Turkey, which obligates social media networks with more than 1 million daily internet users to store their users' data locally and have a representative in Turkey. It also compels social media platforms to remove offensive content reported by individuals or the government within 48 hours, or be subject to a fine of 4.3 million euros. Restrictions on bandwidth and access to their platforms might also be blocked. Finally, a coalition of 11 international press freedom, journalism, and human rights groups condemned the suppression of online and offline press freedom in Turkey following a 4-day visit to the country. The coalition strongly criticized the new social media law for strengthening the already rampant online and offline censorship in Turkey. Thank you.
Not so great news regarding access in Africa and the MENA region, and it seems that freedom of expression is also on the decline in MENA. Thank you for sharing the updates from MENA, Noha. Our last destination on this virtual tour is Asia, where Amrita Chowdhury is. Amrita will update us about the cyber attack on Indian drug maker Dr. Reddy, amendments of China's law on the protection of minors, and Pakistan revoking ban on TikTok. Over to Amrita.
Hello and welcome to the regional update from Asia for the month of October. Indian drug maker Dr. Reddy Laboratories Limited, who recently got approvals to conduct human trials of a COVID-19 vaccine by a Russian research institute, was hit by a cyber attack. While the exact nature of the attack is yet to be made public, this forced the company to temporarily shut its operations worldwide and isolate its data services. Cyber attacks have increased on pharmaceutical firms, especially those involved in COVID-19 vaccine. US authorities has also alleged possible attempts of an attack on Moderna, which is working on the COVID-19 vaccines. China has made amendments to its laws related to protection of minors. The amended law will now include a new chapter dealing with protecting children and their rights online, and the amended law is slated to come into effect on 1st June 2021. The new laws takes a closer scrutiny of people working with children and setting their accountability, making sex education mandatory, putting women in charge of sensitive cases where girls are involved, holding schools, businesses, and online service providers responsible when young people are harmed under their watch. The law also calls to establish a unified electronic identity authentication system for online gaming companies and restrict the hours when minors can access games. It also curbs live streaming platforms from registering anyone under 16 years old. Pakistan has overturned the ban it had imposed on TikTok for allowing indecent and immoral content, after TikTok's management assured the Pakistan Telecommunication Authority that they will block all accounts which are repeatedly involved in spreading obscenity and immorality. That's all from me for this month. Thank you.
And it seems like security concerns and content policy were dominant in Asia this month. Thank you for sharing this overview, Amrita. Let me once again extend thanks to all our colleagues, to Andre, Jacob, Noha, and Amrita for sharing the updates from their respective regions. All updates mentioned by colleagues can be found on Digital Watch, and the link will be in the chat in a few seconds. As our virtual tour of the world is now over, I give the floor back to Vlada. Over to you.
Thank you, Andriana, for taking us to this trip around the world, since we cannot travel in vivo. And it's quite interesting to observe the diversity of topics, from infrastructure in Caribbean to services in Africa to rights in the Middle East, and then education and the minors in Asia. This brings us to the end of our monthly briefing. One final reminder, the Geneva Digital Watch newsletter for this month will be available for download in the next days on the observatory. And at the same time, you can subscribe to the weekly newsletters or updates. You can join us for the web debate on the future of IGF, or IGF Plus, what's next, on the 3rd of November. And if not earlier, then see you at the end of November, Tuesday, 24th of November, 13 UTC or 14 CET. In the meantime, if you wish, feel like staying in the chat, I see there are some good discussions over there. Thank you for joining, and see you next time. Bye-bye.